Welcome to Insured Investors, where we share practical real estate investing tips with an insurance twist. I'm your host, Brooke Beats. Let's get started. Vacation rentals are a great way for investors to earn a steady income, build wealth through property appreciation, and diversify investment portfolios. What investors may not understand is why a typical homeowner's or landlord insurance policy may not be enough coverage. Today, our return guest, Jacqui Price, is here to share how to insure your vacation and short-term rentals. Jacqui is the EVP of Compliance at National Real Estate Insurance Group. Her vast insurance experience over the past 12 years has made her an expert in many areas of our program and has contributed to her success. Welcome back, Jacqui.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. So, vacation rentals today.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to start with, I would like your opinion as to why you feel like vacation rentals are so popular. Because we've seen a huge uptick in the last 3, 4, 5 years.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I've been thinking about this. So I think vacation rentals started as a more affordable rental than maybe a hotel room. But I think over the last 4 or 5 years, they've really morphed into more convenient. So I know I have a couple of vacations coming up, and I know that I searched high and low to make sure I could find a vacation rental that had a separate bedroom for my children and that they had a bed. Like, they both had a bed, whereas in a hotel room, all 4 of us would be crammed in one room and there would be 2 beds. And so I really think it's more about convenience of being able to travel somewhere else but still have that at-home feeling, or still feel like you are comfy and have a good place to retreat to at night. So I think it's just the way that maybe the culture has changed when they think about vacations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are great points. And we've seen a lot of our clients now investing in rental properties.
Of course, yes.
That they're using for vacation rentals. So we want to talk through the insurance of what that looks like. So what is considered a vacation rental? Let's start there.
Okay, yeah. So we have a lot of investor clients with us that, like you said, have started going out into vacation rentals. And essentially, instead of that long-term tenant, that 12-month lease, you are leasing the property for a shorter period of time. Maybe it's a weekend, maybe it's a week or 2 weeks. Really, anything under 30 days is going to be considered a short-term rental or a vacation rental. So just think about anytime, however long your vacation may be, and that rental, that's how long you would stay there. I do know some people will rent out their personal homes, maybe a portion of their home, an upstairs loft or downstairs apartment as a vacation rental, so that's another option as well. And then lastly, I know that sometimes an investor will, or even just someone, just not necessarily an investor, but someone will buy a secondary home. And so that's where they like to go on vacation, but when they're not using it, they like to rent it out as a vacation rental. And as far as NREG is concerned, and I believe most carriers, as long as you're using it as an investment property more than 50% of the time and using it as a vacation rental less than 50%, that's really the sweet spot to where you can still insure it as a vacation rental. You should insure it as a vacation rental because it is primarily an investment property.
Okay, that is good to know. And as far as insurance goes, we need to make sure that everyone understands that the risk is a little bit different, so the insurance policy needs to be written a little bit different. So tell us about that.
Yeah, that's correct. That's a good point. So from a homeowner's perspective, a homeowner's is your personal home. So think about it, you have personal liability, personal contents, the building in which you live in, all of those things go under a personal homeowner's policy. Now, I already mentioned that sometimes people may use their home as a part of their home as a vacation rental. And my advice to you is to make sure that your carrier or that your agent knows that you're doing that, so they can make sure that your carrier is okay with it, because sometimes homeowners policies are going to have short-term rental exclusions. So if you are using your personal home as a vacation rental, just make sure that you have insurance that covers that business aspect. Furthermore, a landlord policy, like I said, is traditionally a 12-month lease. And so that's one tenant. They bring in all of their furniture, they live there night after night, they raise their kids there, and so they're going to be treating that like their home, and it's going to be the same people coming in and off the property, on and off the property for at least 12 months. Whereas with a vacation rental, you have a lot more people on the property. You might have new guests every week. You might have a cleaning crew come in between guests. You probably have a maintenance crew that comes in between guests. And so it's a different risk. And so carriers look at it differently because not only are they not likely to treat the property as well as a long-term guest because they're going to use it for 3 days and never come back, but it's also a higher liability risk. So it's definitely advisable to make sure that your agent and your carrier know that it's a short-term rental so they can make sure they insure you properly.
So what are some of the specific coverages that we need for this particular insurance?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first thing I would say is liability coverage. First and foremost, any piece of property that you own, you should have liability coverage. You never want to have a lawsuit on your desk that you don't have coverage for because someone slipped and fell on a property. So I think it's most important that we talk about liability coverage first. Like I just said, you have all kinds of people on the property at all times with a vacation rental, and they're all different people. So that's a lot of different people that could slip and fall on the property. And so you want to make sure that you have liability coverage all of the time, regardless of who might be there. You also want to think about the amenities that you are offering your guests, because if you have a pool, you need to make sure that pool is insured. If you have a trampoline or a swing set or something in the backyard, you want to make sure you know how your policy is going to react to that type of amenity, and you need to make sure you're comfortable if there's an exclusion there. Also, if you're offering kayaks to your clients or some other type of water sport amenity, you need to know how your coverage is going to react should something happen because you left 2 kayaks downstairs and your guests took them out on the lake. So there's all different kinds of things that you need to think about from a liability perspective on a vacation rental that you don't have to think about on a typical landlord policy. Next, I would talk about property coverage. So your property coverage is the dwelling, so the house. What are you going to do if that house burns down and you're left with the rubble? So you have to think about how you would recover and how you would want insurance to pay you for that. Also think about lower risks, whether that be a pipe burst, whether that be a theft or vandalism or some other type of lower loss than a total loss. How do you expect your insurance carrier to come back to you after that type of loss? Some of those losses you could potentially pay out of pocket. Some of those losses you would want to make sure are fully insured. So it's important that you talk to your agent to know what type of property coverage you have and make sure it's what you expect post-loss. Next, I would talk about contents coverage. So with a 12-month rental, it's an empty apartment building that you're leasing out to your tenant, and they bring in all of their furnishings. But of course, with a vacation rental, you have to fully furnish that property. So you need to think about all of the furniture that you have in the property, all of the bedding, all of the kitchenware. Again, what do you expect after a loss to be repaid for those? Sometimes people will say, I don't need contents coverage. I can bring it all back myself. Or some people may say, I want everything insured, so I need to make sure I have total contents coverage for what I have in there. Everyone's different, but you just have to make sure your policy covers you the way that you want. Last, I would talk about business income coverage or loss of rents. So let's say a property is damaged and you have a covered loss, and now you cannot take any bookings for the next 6 months, but you have 3 months of bookings already on file. So loss of rents works a little bit differently on a vacation rental than a typical landlord policy because the carrier is only going to pay you for the bookings that you lose that were booked prior to the loss occurring. So if you only have 3 months of bookings but your property is down for 6 months, you're not going to get a full 6 months of business income coverage back. You're going to get 3 months of loss of rents. So that's just something also to consider when you're looking at your insurance policy.
Okay, that's a lot of great information.
It is a lot, but it's important.
Yes, so liability, property, contents, loss of rents.
Yes.
That is all highly recommended.
Right.
Are there any coverages that you cannot obtain through short-term rental policies?
So an exclusion that you might be expecting on a vacation rental is really similar to exclusions you would be expecting on a landlord policy. Wear and tear is generally always going to be excluded on an insurance policy because insurance policies are not maintenance plans. If you have a slow leak behind your fridge for 3 months and you find out that it ruined your flooring and you have to replace the whole flooring, that's really a maintenance issue, not an insurance issue, because insurance is for sudden and unforeseen circumstances. So you really want to keep in mind that those maintenance issues from general wear and tear are never going to be covered by insurance. Additionally, I would say mold and fungus. Those are very common exclusions on property policies. And so if that leak were to lead to mold, that likely is not going to be covered by your vacation rental policy. So different things like that are most likely always going to be excluded. I would also say damage by guests. Mm-hmm. So if you have a rowdy crowd come and stay with you for a couple of days and they leave the property worse for wear, all of those repairs are likely going to be out of pocket because your policy is not going to pay for damage caused by your guests.
Is there any way to get coverage for that?
Sure. There are ways, and it's up to you whether or not you enforce them. So I know some rental booking platforms, potentially like Airbnb or VRBO, and I'm sure there are more, but some of the rental booking platforms will offer guests the opportunity to pay for insurance for things like that. Some owners require that that's purchased. Some owners leave it up to the guests. So that's kind of up to each individual investor as to how they want to do it. But that could cover things like damage to the property or loss to the contents. It could cover additional cleaning fees from maybe pets or smoke odor. It could also cover loss of rents, again, from those bookings that you can't make in the future because of a loss that occurred from the previous guest. So those are all things to consider. I will also say that those policies or that those rental booking platforms will typically always offer liability coverage for your guest while your booking is in force. So if there is a slip and fall on the property while your guests are there, that liability coverage may come from Airbnb's or VRBO's policy, but you still want to make sure that you have liability coverage outside of that, because what if it's the cleaning crew that falls and breaks their leg on your property? That's not going to be covered by a rental booking platform's policy. That's going to be covered by your policy. So we'll go back to making sure that you always have liability coverage on hand. So yes, there are ways to potentially get coverage for those items. Not all of them, but it's really up to the investor whether they require it or not.
Okay. So what about the belongings that the guests are bringing to the home?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that's going to be covered under their personal home or their condo owners or even renters policy. So your personal homeowner's policy follows you wherever you go in most cases. And so that their contents coverage from their homeowner's policy is going to follow them to your vacation rental. So that is not something that an investor would have to worry about.
Okay. So I'm going to stay in an Airbnb in Colorado in a few months.
Exciting.
Yes. And I'm taking my personal belongings, of course. So if something were to get stolen or lost or damaged, my own personal insurance would cover that.
Yep. Your own policy would cover that. You wouldn't have to pay for anything extra to cover your contents as you're traveling.
That is great to know.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk cost.
Okay.
Typically, we know that vacation rental insurance can be more expensive. Mm-hmm. Is that always the case? Is that the case with National Real Estate Insurance? How does that work?
Well, it can be more expensive. And I would say it's more expensive because carriers see it as a riskier piece of business. Again, we talked about the liability risk are enhanced. So you have more people on site. You potentially have amenities that you're offering, so it's a higher liability risk. So yeah, that makes it more expensive from a liability standpoint. From a property standpoint, same thing. We've talked about, guests are not going to treat your property as well. They may not tell you when something goes wrong. They may leave the stove on, more common than a regular tenant. And so the potential loss to a property is also going to be higher. So yes, carriers look at vacation rentals as a riskier move for them to insure, and so the rates generally are higher. As far as National Real Estate Insurance Group is concerned, it really depends on where the location is, as far as our carrier placement and whether or not it's more expensive, but it's not more expensive than a traditional landlord policy with us. We don't have an upcharge for a vacation rental or anything like that, but it of course, a vacation rental in Florida is going to be more expensive to own and insure than a vacation rental in Colorado.
Okay. we have a game we're going to play.
Oh, goodness.
So I'm going to show you some out of the ordinary vacation rentals found on Airbnb, and you're going to tell us and our viewers some insurance considerations for investors. So the pictures will be on the screen and links will be in the depiction. This is not legally binding advice. This is just information provided by you as an expert in the field as to what you think people should look out for.
Got it. Okay, let's go.
Okay, so the first one is a cliff dweller. So it's a home essentially built into the side of a mountain.
Man, that one looks a little scary to me. I'm not sure that I would stay there. So if I look at this picture, there is a kind of a part of the home down below on the cliff, and then there's a lot of stairs up to another portion of the home. And so right away, I mean, it is on the side of a cliff, and so right away, I just think about the liability risk involved. Should the floor give way? Should one of the stairs become unsupportive and someone get hurt? Right away, I think liability risk all the way. So whoever is insuring this is probably charging quite a bit for liability costs. Mm-hmm. Additionally, your property cost is probably going to be higher as well, because the cost to rebuild this is going to be a lot more than a property on the ground, of course. Yep. There's probably cranes and different things involved to rebuild it. So all in all, you just want to think about your liability concerns and then the cost to rebuild and make sure that you're insured adequately.
Okay. The next one is a bandwagon in Tennessee. It's on some beautiful land, it looks like. A lot of trees and forestry, but what do you think about this one?
Yeah, this one's very interesting. It's very Tennessean. I like it. It kind of takes you back to the covered wagon days. I'm not sure if you would be able to insure the wagon. Maybe you might be able to get a small policy to cover the wagon, but essentially for this, I would mostly recommend liability only coverage. I'm not sure how much out of pocket you would be if you had to replace that wagon, or if you'd say, well, that was fun while it lasted, and you can't really rebuild this, I don't think. So my main advice would just be to make sure that you have liability coverage on the property, just in case anything did happen.
Next up is a Kellogg Doolittle house in California. It looks very futuristic.
Wow.
Kind of built into the mountain. Very interesting. What do you think?
Yeah, so I'm not sure what kind of construction materials were used in this. So I think you're going to look at your rebuild cost for that as well. Like if it's non-uniform or non-common construction materials, you're always going to have a higher rebuild cost. So something to think about with that. Also, if you're not going to be repairing it with like kind and construction materials, you want to make sure it gets rebuilt how it was built originally. You want to make sure you have a policy that covers the original construction materials. So that's very important to think about with this as well. And again, same thing with the cliff dweller. I mean, this is going to take a lot of construction costs to rebuild, because it's just not a super common place to be building. I don't see a street or a road that easily gets you there. I'm sure there's one behind it, but just different things to think about when you think about the rebuild cost and making sure you're insured adequately.
Okay. Number 4 is a Bruno Steel house. Kind of looks like a little spaceship on stilts.
Yeah.
This one's in Texas.
It has a very Star Wars theme, like vibe coming from it. So the stilts are one thing that I want to point out. Anytime the home is not on a firm foundation, that's going to probably unattract a lot of carriers. Mm-hmm. So again, not sure who's insuring this, but it's going to need to be someone who's comfortable with a home being on stilts. It's also made of steel, so same thing that we talked about with the California house. They don't want a policy that's like kind construction materials, because they want to make sure they're going to get paid to rebuild it in the same kind of steel that they built it the first time. I do like this one because it doesn't look like there's a ton of stairs. It looks like there's a walking path onto the little hill right there. So I don't necessarily think it's as big of a liability risk, but it's definitely going to be expensive to rebuild.
Yeah. Okay, and our last one is an actual spaceship.
Ooh.
In Washington. What do you think?
That one is exciting. I actually don't see a whole lot of change with this to a outside of it being not a normal frame construction building.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's on the ground. Mm-hmm. It is kind of like a yurt for those carriers that will insure yurts. I'm sure when you look inside of it, it's probably just one big room with hopefully maybe a sink or something like that, and electricity. So I don't think it's going to be too hard to insure. You know, think about your rebuild cost. I don't know what it takes to build a spaceship, but just think about that when you're insuring it. But this one is probably would be the easiest one to find a carrier for, of the 5 that we looked at.
Okay. If you had to only pick one to stay in, which one would you stay?
I think the bandwagon for sure.
Yeah?
Yeah. Just that, like, 1800s feel.
Mm-hmm.
Go stay in Tennessee. The weather, I'm sure, would be great. I don't know about the other ones. So.
Yeah.
What about you?
Probably the Doolittle house in California.
Okay, that one looks fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. You'd have to let me know how you got there.
Yes. Yes. Well, so much great information about vacation rentals. Thank you for joining us yet again.
You're welcome. I was glad to be here.
We'll continue to post new episodes every other Wednesday on NREIG's YouTube channel, that's NREIG, and on Spotify and Apple Podcasts at Insured Investors.